And now I would like to very quickly introduce this webinar and our presenters, who very kindly agreed to present this highly interesting research. This is a project called Retranche la violence, Exiting Violence, a project with transformative potential for practices and policies in Quebec, development and implementation of the Partnership Initiative.
Financé par le Fonds de recherche du Québec.
Geneviève Lessard is a full professor at the School of Social Work, Criminology, University of Laval. She leads the strategic group RIVE, Applied and Interdisciplinary Research on Intimate Family Structure Violence, funded by Fonds de Recherche Québec and SSHRC. Her work focuses on various forms of victimization experienced by children, including exposure to intimate partner family violence and development and evaluation of innovative prevention tools, parenting, collaboration among support resources in the field of innovative intimate partner family violence. We also welcome Céline Lalonde, PhD, is a professor in the Department of Social Work in the University of Quebec in Ottawa. She's a social worker with clinical experience working with individuals who are victims of criminal acts. Her interests include socio-legal intervention, professional collaboration, intimate partner violence, practical training, and program evaluation. So just a few words before, there will be a Q&A at the end of the session. It'll be a 10-minute long session. So what I suggest is that you please put your questions into the chat and we'll compile them at the end and we'll be able to present those questions to our presenters. So once again, welcome. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, and I hope you have an excellent webinar. And I will turn it over to Geneviève Lessard. Thank you so much. So hello to everybody. Thank you, Katia, for this introduction to our presentation. I'll move directly to the outline of our presentation. I'll begin by explaining to you the brief history of the project, that is where it began and how it came to be and was developed. I'll also explain why we developed it. And then very summarily, I'll explain what Retranche, Exiting Violence, is, what the main objectives are, which teams are directing the work together, and the various work streams, objectives that we have included in our project, to give you an overall sense of the project before I'll turn it over to Céline, who will give you the meat, if you like, of the presentation. We've decided to present you more details on this project, a specific stream, and that is the one on the collaboration and partnership within the project itself. So Céline will be explaining the objectives, the methodology behind this particular stream, and we'll also speak to some of the preliminary results before we move on to the question period. So to begin, our project very broadly addresses several types of violence. Intimate partner violence, family violence, and structural violence. And intimate partner violence includes family violence, domestic violence, as well as sexual violence that might be that the victim is subjected to. And this kind of violence, as family violence, is most family violence that addresses children. And we also have the different types of violences that are done against persons due to their personal identity, or violence that is committed against persons because the services are not well adapted to the personalities of these persons. We know that research has clearly showed that these are major issues that have very grave consequences for victims, but that are also very expensive for society in order for society to take care of the victims as well as the perpetrators. Here are some two statistics explaining the situation in Quebec. In Quebec, we have a little bit over 25,000 cases of domestic violence reported to police services in each year. These are statistics from 2022, the most recent ones available. But one year similar to the next, and we know that women are mostly the victims. Regarding child abuse, there are 41,490 reports of child maltreatment were retained by the Directors of Youth Protection for 2025. And these are only the known cases. We do understand that reported cases do not represent the entire project, which is far broader than that, because very few cases actually end up in youth protection services or at the police. This is truly the tip of the iceberg, as only 90% of victims of domestic violence and 5 to 6 victims of sexual assault will report their perpetrator. We also know that this violence has serious consequences and highly documented consequences for victims. However, very little research focuses on how victims can exit this violence. And this is what underlies our project, which focused on this theme in order to be carried out. So at the beginning of the project, before we obtained our subsidies and our grant, let's go back. We're back in 2020. Obviously, there was the world pandemic that we have all experienced, which was very hard on persons living in a situation of violence. And we were working with partners who had to adapt their services very quickly. These were the practitioners involved in order to adjust to the pandemic context. So at the same time, we were receiving funding at the RAVE, or AIV. This brings together some 500 research centers from the Quebec Center, that is the Alliance of Research Centers on Gender-Based Violence, working in the Canadian context. In 2020, we received funding for our research center, which is funded by the Cité Culture of Quebec Fund. We began this in a very special environment, of course, where it was not possible for us to bring together our members to hold meetings and to put in place projects. It represented a major challenge for us at the time. So our strategy consisted in doing a questionnaire, that is rather a poll, to identify with our members and members of the prackers, that is researchers from universities, because we're a partnership after all, to see what could bring us together, all of the members, as part of a major structural project. That is where we came up with the themes of violence. And in the post-pandemic era, we had not yet come out of the pandemic, we were still in the middle of it. And the project was slowed down due to the fact that our research center already in 2023 had to ask for renewal for funding for our research center. So as a director of this research center, and my entire coordination team was highly mobilized in 2023 at the time when we launched the project, because we had to stabilize our funding sources. So we have this project in mind, but to carry out the project, we needed infrastructure funding to assure a certain level of sustainability. Of course, these research projects are never sustainable entirely. We always depend on funding. But in 2026 today, this is the ideal time to present the project to you, because it is off to a running start. We're still at the very heart of the project. We have many themes that have been launched because of the limited timeline that we have. As we said at the beginning, so we focused on one of our themes specifically, but if you'd like to know more about it, we can answer your questions on the workstream and the projects as a whole during our Q&A. Our objective was to describe the pathways out of intimate family and structural violence in order to identify factors facilitating exit from violence and to mobilize them in practices and public policies. This is really an action research project where we have set knowledge development objectives, but the idea is also to improve on practices. The project includes a vast group of experts in the area of violence. We have close to 30 university researchers, And we also have partners from the practice and community organizations, from institutional settings, and especially from community organizations. We have a few from institutional settings and some from political partners from departments and ministries who are involved in the projects as well. We also have many, many students who work on the various different pathways of the project, such as interviewers. They conduct analysis, they're analysts, they do multitasking, and we also we have 5 persons who are experts in lived experience who provide valuable guidance on the project's direction during the strategic phases. So often during the critical stage of the project, we call on them. We are financed by SSHRC in the partnership period for 2023 to 2030. We are a little bit behind, as I explained earlier. At the beginning of the project already, we began to be behind. We are now planning a project of over an 8-year timeline rather than the initial 7 years. And that should be much more realistic as a result. We do have 4 work streams that have already begun. That is C1, that is workstream 1, is qualitative. We will be doing narrations for persons who feel that they have successfully exited violence, and we have 2 interviews per person. We speak about their life stories, and we speak about the different factors allowing them to exit. This should end around 2028, 2029, if we include the period where we'll be disseminating the results. But over the next year, we should have at least preliminary findings. And pathway 2 is quantitative. There we call on major representative populational surveys where we're able to identify exiting factors quantitatively based on representative samplings. And then we will be integrating this quantitative and qualitative data in order to move to pathway 3, which will begin next year. And in this phase, we will be focusing on intervention practices. We'll be having focus groups with interveners, with managers, with decision makers, stakeholders, to understand what is being done well in current services, and what encourages factors enabling persons to exit violence, and what is it that we need to improve on and change on in our intervention practices to foster exit from violence. And the 4th stream is something focusing on Indigenous persons. We will be doing a focus group, but that will begin a bit later on as well. So we will try to focus on what in politics needs to be improved on in order to mobilize exit factors, document analysis and politics. And then we have the 5th work stream, which we have already begun through sharing existing tools. And this focuses on exit factors. We review existing factors, and as soon as we have findings, both quantitative and qualitative at hand, we'll be able to create new tools that focus on these exit factors. And the yellow one is the one that Celine will be coming to today. This is the one that focuses on the partnership analysis and development in the project. And this runs throughout the entire project. It's really the only work stream that runs through the entire project, in addition to our steering committee and also the one alongside with the experts having lived experience. So on that note, I would like to turn it over to Céline to continue with the presentation. Thank you, Geneviève. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar. I have the honor of being the person directing Stream 6 of the project, that is the analysis and development of the partnership. I've been involved in the project since its very beginning. I filled out the survey where we had to identify interests. I took part in the meetings. And what I was interested in this project was really how it worked from the inside. And I'll speak to that very quickly. Before the project started off, I was at Western University. I was involved in a sabbatical, and I was observing Katrina, who was managing a fairly large pan-Canadian project as well. and I found it fascinating. So I wanted to see this from the inside and how these large projects would work. So that was my first, if you like, incentive to join. And there was another incentive that no doubt encouraged Geneviève to approach me to ask me if I would be interested in directing this project, is that my work is on the professional collaboration and domestic violence. More generally, that is my most important research theme as part of my personal work. So these two elements, therefore, led me to become the person who heads the work. Oh, sorry about that. So I'm responsible for Theme 6, or basically it is a long-term focus, and that's quite rare. To have a 7, 8-year-old projects where we have the opportunity of getting to know each other, where we can deploy our actions and really think through this in a detailed fashion. It's a very pleasant work environment, and I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity of heading this Theme 6. So here, who are our team members? Well, we have researchers. We have 4 or 5 researchers. We also have 4 or 5 members from the practice that make up our theme. Sometimes there are changes along the way, depending on the availability or change in position of the partners, but more or less since the beginning, these are the members making up the theme. We also have students who support us in the work, and we also have hired somebody to head the coordination to allow me to move forward with the work. We also have a very strong relationship with the steering committee, with Geneviève and Caroline, who are responsible. We meet about 3 times a year. We have a preset schedule, which makes it easier for us to meet. It really allows us to ensure that we have tracking of the work, but it's also a forum for exchange and to find new ideas. And sometimes afterwards, we're also going to be creating subcommittees that can move forward with the work that we have put in place. So the overall objective of this particular theme, and whose initial objective was set out in our grant application, was to strengthen collaboration and partnerships among the various stakeholders in the fields of intimate partners, family violence, and structural violence in Quebec. In the past, these groups were working in silo, and there might be some collaborative links between them, but the idea behind this project is to really have a more holistic, global overview of violence, and thanks to our themes and our work, we wanted to ensure that those people working the different types of violence also have an opportunity to meet as part of activities. And more specifically, and again, I apologize for my sound, but our objective is to recognize and mobilize by developing different participation processes. And through these, we want to further expertise. As Geneviève said, we have research experts, we have practitioner experts, we also have experts who have lived experience. And I think I'd like to mention very quickly that it's important that this diversity of expertise be recognized. Of course, some people wear several of these hats. So once again, that is something that we do acknowledge, that we accept, and that we find of interest. So the idea is to value this. And we also have an objective that is research-focused, where we want to document successful collaborative practices and to have a strategy that allows us to address all of the different challenges as part of a partnership. And in this partnership, we have some very experienced people and who work in collaborative research. So already there, we have a great deal of expertise in partnerships that is part of the project. And our role as Theme 6 consists in ensuring that all of this knowledge be shared with the members, that we can all benefit from it and that we can value it. And finally, as part of this documentation and recognition process, we also provide different training. I'm not sure that training is the right word. I think it's more about circulating information and knowledge sharing rather than actual training, but there are workshops available. These are available to members, and this is during our annual meeting, which takes place in person, and there we can ensure that the data compiled can be distributed to ensure that all of those who are involved be aware of what we're doing well, but that they're also aware of things that require improvement. So what I wanted to specifically speak about today is, first of all, our documenting collaborations. That is our survey. We basically have two different ways of collecting data, either through observations of having meetings among the themes, as well as through a survey that we send out to our members twice a year. So we already did our first collection of data in December, January, and I wanted to share with you the process that we put in place in order to create the survey. I think that might actually inspire some of you to perhaps follow a similar approach in your projects. So again, if you have any questions, as we said afterwards, we invite you to write to us about this after the webinar. So to develop the survey, and more globally, to really establish our work within a scientific framework, we did a review of the different tools. In 2024, we did this mainly. We looked at the literature on the partnership research. We also looked at the various tools that exist and are available to measure intersectoral collaboration. And we didn't limit this to the field of violence only because we wanted to glean as much inspiration as possible. We wanted to identify a number of tools and more, in fact, 4 main tools that we've retained. And again, I'll be speaking to those in just a moment. So among the results that seemed relevant and interesting to us, we were able to identify the dimensions allowing us to document the partnerships and research of interest for Retranche, for our movement. And the idea was to prioritize some of these dimensions. And to that end, we used 2 surveys that we sent to members. First of all, we asked people to explain to us that among the dimensions, of which there were some 16, 17, which of these dimensions were deemed relevant by the members and which they thought it would be relevant to document. And this was not very successful. What the feedback indicated is that these dimensions were considered to be interesting, but we had to go back to the members and ask them to prioritize. So among those 16 or 17 that we had to establish as priorities, we didn't quite see that we could document the entire 16 or 17 collaborative dimensions. That would have been a great deal of work. And so we went back to them and asked them to establish a list of priorities of those priorities that were the most important, not only because we were not interested in the others, but what we wanted to ensure was that those 6 most important ones would enable us to collect sufficient data so that we could fully understand how collaboration was unfolding among these 6 priority dimensions. And on the basis of that exercise, we were able to identify the priority dimensions that I'll be presenting in just a moment. And then we had an exchange among our colleagues who are experts in the field who were interested in working on developing this survey and our data collection tool to understand what kind of quality our measurement tool should have. Essentially, we were wondering whether or not we wanted a tool that would be very, very high psychometric criteria. This would involve a development process involving a number of specific steps, or rather, would we prefer to have tools that would be more readily accessible and would allow us to more quickly have access to information that we would be able to mobilize and reinvest in a partnership. And the outcome of this discussion is that nobody here really claimed to publish any of this in high impact studies, that it really was most about the usefulness of our measurement tools rather than meeting with any very stringent scientific criteria, which it would have taken a number of years in a partnership to develop. And that is something that we then agreed on. And then we created tools. And these tools So, coming back to the survey, there were 5 tools created. We already had 5 existing tools that we decided to retain. The 6 priority dimensions were the ones focused on capacity. That is the impact of the partnership on individual, organizational, collective capacities. And it's also the confluence, the different synergies of communicating the relational dimension. So once we identify these 6 priority dimensions, we tied these to the various points that they were connected to at the beginning. Then we basically took the questions that were tied to these dimensions. We looked at these specifically, and we retained those questions that we agreed on as a subcommittee of researchers and practitioners, and we've adapted it to our specific research context, that is the actual partnership. We worked on a number of them, and we looked at each of the tools and each of the questions. For example, when there was some disagreement about certain questions that should not be retained, we spoke about the possible disagreements, and again, we always spoke about this in the committee. And at the end of the day, we were successful in developing a survey that accounts for each of these different dimensions. And that is based on the CRUP, which is a tool developed by King and Al. It was developed in 2003. And it is called the Integration of Human Services Measure, developed by Brown and Roberts, and the Partnership Self-Assessment, which is developed by the Center for the Advancement of Collaborative Strategies in Health. We also had the Collaboration Agreement template and the Diagnostic Tool for Partnership Action, developed by Quebec researchers. The questions we retained were those that were integrated into our survey. And again, to come back to this, to go back a little bit, once we identified the questions, once we had a discussion on this, we put in place a content validation process and a practical validation process. That is, we submitted our survey to persons from our 3 groups of experts. That is, those who are lived experience experts. We also have research experts, and we had experts in the field. And we asked them to provide feedback on the questions retained and to explain to us to what extent they felt they were relevant. And we also asked them to speak to the clarity of the issues and the ability to respond effectively to the questions. So as I mentioned earlier, we had a first data collection in December 2025 and January 2026. Now, as to the survey format that we distributed, is that these questions are on the Likert scales, that it's 5 points, 1 being that is, we ask people whether or not they agree or they don't agree at all, 5 being the answer where they agree the most, and it's also satisfaction level, that is 1 being the lowest level of satisfaction and 5 being the highest one. We also added questions such as don't know or doesn't apply, because depending on the members' involvement, there were a few questions where we were able to see that some people would not be able to answer. And here's an example of a question that we've included in our survey, is that the members are able to express and discuss differing viewpoints. That's one of the questions that's on the scales regarding our relationships. And at the end of each section, that is the Likert scales on the dimensions, there's also a short answer question enabling people to either explain their answer if they felt that this was necessary, or again, to add something to their answer so that they could complete the answer to allow us to better understand their experience and their perception of each of the dimensions. So we did have a fairly high response rate. There was 39, that is, we had 2/3 of the people who filled out this survey, and it took about 12 minutes to fill out the survey. That's not very long. And in our mind, it was important. We want to mobilize people. We want there to be feedback. We want to have an exchange with them, but we don't want to burden them in this data collection experience and the exchange because our partnerships, our partners are all very busy. So among those persons who responded, we also had very good representation from the subgroups. So that's a third of the respondents are researchers, another third are practitioners, and a little bit less than 20% are staff for the project, and 10% are lived experience experts. So many of them answered. We also had a number of students who responded to the survey. And though most of those who answered, that is close to half, were persons who've been involved in this for more than 2 years. And I thought that was of interest because what it demonstrates is the level of commitment by those people. If some people have been there for a while, they continue working on their project in the long term, and it shows that they want to continue to be involved. And I think that speaks a great deal about the collaboration in place. We also had some people who'd been working on the project for less time, but there is movement. So we see that the base is very important. That is, people who've been involved in this for a long time and who responded to the survey. A little bit more than two-thirds of the persons are involved in one of the streams, and another third is not involved. Others, for those of who've been involved in the stream, haven't yet started, and others are also more participants on the margins. They're not involved in a specific stream or theme, but they are interested in their project. They're very interested in the information being distributed, etc. So that's about a third of the people who are not involved in an active theme, but they did fill out the survey. And there's another important point. If you look at the variability regarding the participation in meetings, we have people such as a third about of those who took part in at least only one meeting during the year. That's about a third. And another third took part in some 3-4 meetings regarding themes or in the annual general meeting in person who answered their survey. And we also have close to a quarter who have taken part in 5 or more meetings over the course of the year and who have provided answers. So once again, we're seeing a certain amount of variability in the level of engagement that is highlighted here in the survey that we handed out. So I think that's very interesting. It gives us a sense of the results that are quite varied. And these preliminary results show us that the portrait of people who answered is also quite varied. So here is a very simple way of presenting the preliminary results. It is very basic, but in yellow, I've highlighted the items that are a bit lower on the list, and that gives us an idea of perhaps what we need to take action on. And in green, I've highlighted the very high findings. The Likert scale is 5 points. So in order to process the data is that the data was in a score, and we've calculated based on the average. So regarding communication, and that's 19 questions, is that the level of satisfaction is very high. The respondents to the survey regarding communication items, either based on their own theme or a stream or with the management team involved in the project, have an average of 4.75, 4.385 with a standard deviation that's quite low. So overall, people seem to be very satisfied with the communication they've experienced, whether this be with communication from the top to the bottom, and that is the information we send to them, the communication that is top down, that is their communication with those heading the different themes and the directors, means that they're able to communicate them very readily. The lowest item is that it's whether or not it's easy to identify who to contact when I need to communicate with Retranche. There we don't have a very low score as well. It's 4.38 over 5. So in-house, we know that coordination has changed over a number of times over the last few years. The team has changed, so perhaps people had to spend more time to find the person they needed to communicate with, and some action has been made there. We put in place a collaboration guide. All of the information is now available. So when we receive that kind of information, we can quickly respond to it, which makes the process interesting. And again, the scale where we had the lowest results was about synergy. In our project, synergy was defined on the basis of the idea that when we work collectively, we achieve better results than if we were to work alone in an isolated fashion and that we compile our work. That is, collaboration means that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And there were 5 questions linked to synergy. There we asked people whether or not Retranche is able to establish the objectives collectively. And this is the scale that saw the lowest results, and they're not very good either. The result is 4.37 over 5, which shows that we have an average that shows the satisfaction rate is just average, and the spread is a little bit higher. There might be a little bit of bit more variability depending on the groups. And the third scale has to do with relational dynamics. We had 5 items that were tied to this question. So once again, as with communication, the score is very high and indicates that the satisfaction is very high. Standard deviation is very small as well. So here we sense that the satisfaction level seems to be shared by all of the respondents, regardless of what group they belong to. And there are other scales, and these have to do with reciprocity and congruence. This means that the intergroup relationships and congruence, by congruence, what we meant is the fact that the type of relationship we have between the experts groups is aligned on the expectations that we have. That is, are we as much in a relationship with the people that we want to be in a relationship with or not? In fact, there were 5 questions here. And overall, it's the same themes for those both 2 scales. So first of all, we had asked people to what extent you're able to be in contact with the lived experience experts, practitioners, and research experts, staff, and to what extent are the different themes related or in a relationship. So those were 5 items, and we asked them to what extent they would like to be in contact with these various subgroups. And when we conducted the preliminary analysis, what we're seeing in the answers is that there's a certain amount of difference between the relations that people have and the ones that they would like to have with the lived experience experts, with practitioners, as well as the inter-theme or inter-site, what you like, relationships. So here what we intend to do is to delve into this a bit more to understand how people would like to see better relationships with these groups. It's an activity that we can organize later, and again, I can come back to that in just a moment. So this is a scale that has already given rise to questions and reflection, and again, we intend to reinvest in this in the practice over the coming years. And finally, this is our last scale that we focused on in the survey and which we felt was a priority. That is the impact potential of the project. When it comes to the impact potential, there were 15 items, 15 questions, and these were divided into 3 subcategories: the impact on individuals, on organizations, and impacts on community. And to make it simpler, we compiled all of the answers together, and here we see that the faith in the project's impact potential is quite elevated. So once again, it's close to 5. However, we do see that there is a somewhat higher variance, 0.65, that we saw precedingly in other scales. So when you analyze the answers in a subscale, it indicates that people have more faith that their project can have an impact on them individually rather than having impact in a community, which is absolutely normal. So the closer a project is, the harder it is to carry out and to measure. So it's not a surprising finding. But as the project will move along, what we intend to do is to measure less the potential impact of the projects, but to measure the measurable impact on our members. And after all, we'll be having this survey twice a year, so it will enable us to analyze the data as they evolve over time and see whether or not the impacts of the project are consistent with a person's beliefs as to the impact the project would have. So that is something that is very important for us. Now, the continuation, what comes next? So what we intend to do, of course, is to further our analysis. And again, this is what I just presented is the preliminary analysis. We have started to analyze the qualitative analysis coming from this survey. We will also want to triangulate these observation analysis. And as part of our observations, as I mentioned, we record our meetings. We also developed an evaluation grid based on our 6 different dimensions that we used in the survey, but on others as well. We also intend to have a cross-sectional use of the data with the surveys, how they feed into each other, and why is it that we have some very high scores, and how do we document the observable practices that enable us to explain this high level of satisfaction. The same is true as well when the scores are somewhat lower. We're about to create a knowledge mobilization committee. Again, this is an idea that came from our partnerships with the practitioners and something that we mentioned during our last meeting of Theme 6. It was said that on the one hand, our practice partners wanted to become involved in the sub-projects or the activities that are most closely tied to their own expertise, and as well, they very quickly wanted to ensure that the data collected be usable for the project, but perhaps more broadly as well. So we agreed that it would be relevant to immediately mobilize Theme 6. In fact, we have a meeting planned for tomorrow for Theme 6. It's our first collaborative work between our Themes 5 and 6, who are responsible for developing tools. So already we're working on ensuring that our data be simplified, that it be made accessible, that it be disseminated in order to be useful. And of course, we have the next data collection coming up. As well, we'll be organizing workshops, very likely. As I mentioned, there's the issue of reciprocity, and that gives rise to a number of questions that we've begun to speak about, but we absolutely want to have an exchange with some of our members to see how we can implement this, the idea of having more relationships between the subgroups and to make certain subgroups more visible. So there will be a workshop or an activity focusing on a particular issue. And in the midterm as well, we'll have dissemination activities. So once we have the sense that our data is sufficiently sound, from a validity point of view and with all of the triangulation we intend to put in place, then we want to ensure that these are sound scientifically. Then that is what we'll be doing over the next months and years. So that is what I wanted to cover regarding the work for Theme 6. So I apologize, I mixed up my slides a little bit, so I'd be very happy to clarify anything that you might be a little bit confused about regarding our decisions and the comments I made regarding either Theme 6 or the project as a whole. But Geneviève and I are available and we'll be very happy to answer any of the questions you have. So thank you very much for your active listening.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci
Thank you
beaucoup
so
pour
much
cette belle présentation
for
vraiment
that wonderful
intéressante,
presentation. It's
aussi sur
extremely
l'histoire un peu que vous
interesting.
avez
And thank you as
utilisée,
well for
l'histoire
presenting the various
questionnaire, comment
tools
vous avez
that you've used, the various
sélectionné les
surveys,
questionnaires
and
qui étaient
how you
utiles dans le cadre de ce
identified
projet.
the questions to ask in the
Puis
survey, how you
moi, j'aurais une
developed it.
toute première
I
question,
would have a
c'était pour
first
savoir, parce que je
question.
voyais qu'il y avait un lien avec
I
le
see that there
COVID et
was
tout.
a link
C'est un
with COVID
sujet, c'est un peu
earlier.
un sujet de départ, on va dire, mais est-ce que ça a
Again,
été
that's perhaps a
décidé à
starting
partir du
point,
fait
but
que
was your
justement,
decision
c'était plus
made on the
difficile de
basis
sortir des violences en période COVID?
that it was more
Et
difficult to
donc, est-ce que
exit
c'est à partir de là
violence
que
during
vous
COVID?
avez
And was that your starting point?
pensé que ça pourrait être
Is
intéressant
that
ce
where you
type de
believe that it
projet
would
qui
be interesting
justement
to launch this
aiderait
kind of
les victimes
project,
à mieux
which
sortir des
in fact
situations
would help
conjugales, d'autant
victims to
plus dans cette
exit family
période-là?
violence?
Parce qu'on
Because it was
sait que ça a été
especially bad
encore
during
plus
that time.
compliqué que
We
le
know
COVID.
that their situation was even more
Oui,
difficult than it was
peut-être
previously.
répondre, Céline,
Well, I
sur
could
votre
answer,
question.
Céline,
En
if
fait,
I may, and then you
la
can
période
jump
où on
in.
a travaillé,
Yes,
j'ai
the
passé quand même
period
vite
during
pour
which we
expliquer le
worked, and
processus, mais il y a eu 3
I
rencontres
think
de
we quickly explained that, but
co-construction
we
du
had
projet
8
de
pre-building
2021 à
steps for building
2022.
the
Donc, c'est
project in
vraiment un projet,
2021 to
les
2022.
objectifs, qui va être
The
sur quel chantier, qui veut
objectives
faire
of the
quoi,
project were
tout
to
a été discuté
identify who would
ensemble,
be
même la
doing
structure de
which theme.
gouvernance.
We made all of the decisions
Donc, on a
together, even the
décidé
governance
ça dans les
structure.
rencontres au
We
début en
decided
Zoom
that
parce qu'on
during
n'avait pas le
our
droit de se
meetings
réunir. La
on
dernière
Zoom early
rencontre
on
a été
because
en
we were not able to
présentiel.
meet, but the last
Puis
meeting then
l'idée
was in
de la
person.
COVID,
And
ça a été peut-être un petit
COVID
peu un
might
point
have
de
been
centralisation de l'intérêt parce
a
que les
central
partenaires étaient
point for us
préoccupés, oui,
for
par
interest because,
l'augmentation
yes, our
des violences,
partners
par
were
le
worried
défi
about
des
the
victimes de
increase
s'en
in violence
sortir,
and
mais
how difficult it
il et
was for
elles
victims to
savaient
exit
aussi
violence at
que
that
la
time.
période
But
post-pandémique
there was also the
allait pas être
post-pandemic
de tout
period
repos non
was
plus.
not going to be
Parce
easier,
que
as from what
justement,
we could
les
see,
victimes ont été
because the
pris avec
victims, in fact,
leur
were stuck
auteur dans une
with their
pandémie confinée,
perpetrators in a confined
avec
space.
des défis d'accès
They had
aux
access
ressources
problems
et
when it came to
ça a aggravé les violences. Donc,
resources,
quand il
and
va y
it
avoir
exacerbated
un
violence.
retour dans les services
So
réguliers,
when
ce sera plus le
there was
même
a return to
contexte
the
de
so-called regular
pratique. Donc,
services,
on a
the
décidé notre
practice
projet, oui, dans le
context would
contexte de
have
la
changed. So
pandémie, mais on
yes, we
voulait
began the
qu'il soit
project
plus
in
large que
the
ça,
context of a
pas
pandemic,
s'appliquer
but we
seulement
wanted
dans
it
un
to be broader.
contexte
We did not want it to apply only
pandémique ou post-pandémique
during
immédiat, là, parce que
an
dans le fond,
immediate
on poursuivait
pandemic or
sur le
post-pandemic
concours de
environment
7 ans.
because, again,
Donc, on
we
ne voulait
were
pas rester dans
bidding
la
on
pandémie
we
pour
were part
7
of a
ans,
competition for 7 years, and we
mais
hoped
on
that
voulait
certainly the
que le
pandemic
projet
wouldn't last that
réponde
long,
à des
but
besoins
we wanted this project
concrets,
to
donc un peu
be
plus
able to meet
immédiats.
with
Puis après
concrete,
ça, les
immediate
transformations des pratiques
uh,
politiques, ben, ce soit
needs, and as
encore
well, we
pertinent, même
wanted
si on
it
ne parle
to
plus de pandémie
remain
présentement.
relevant
C'est
depending,
vraiment ça qui se passe
even when
dans le
the political
concret
context would
du
change. And I
projet.
think that's what we're seeing right now in the project.
Merci beaucoup.
D'accord.
Je vous remercie
Thank
à
you
mon
very much.
tour.
Thank you.
C'est super
I
intéressant.
just
C'est
want
un
to say that this was very
projet très
interesting.
emballant, je
This
trouve,
is a really
Retranche.
exciting project, Retranche,
Et puis, j'ai trouvé
exiting
intéressant
violence.
que
And what
vous
I found so
détailliez
interesting is how you
la
detailed,
prise de pouls du partenariat. En fait, je ne sais
you
pas comment
surveyed
qualifier
the
la
partnership, how
démarche,
you
mais ça
took the
serait de la
pulse
bonne
of it. I don't
santé
quite know how to
d'un
call that, but
partenariat dans une
I think
structure
you wanted to
qui
ensure that you
comporte
had a
énormément
healthy
d'acteurs qui est très
partnership, and you had
complexe.
a
Donc,
very
on sait qu'en
complicated,
partenariat, on peut
a
réaliser de grandes
multi-partnership
choses,
context. And I
mais je
know that many
trouvais
things can be achieved in
important
a
et
partnership, but what
intéressant
I think is
ce
so
chantier que
interesting
vous avez
here and
présenté
important
qui
is the
permet de
theme that you
s'assurer que
presented, which
ce
enables you to
partenariat-là est en
ensure
bonne
that
santé.
this
Puis
partnership
venir
remains healthy,
ajuster certains
and
éléments aux
that
besoins.
you've
Et
adjusted
puis la
things
démarche
as well as you went
systématique
along,
et
and you
logique
had
que
a
vous
very
avez
systematic
utilisée pour la
approach and
mettre en place.
logic,
C'était fort intéressant. On a une
logical
question
approach were
dans
also interesting.
le
We do have a
Q&A.
question
Donc,
here in the
c'est
Q&A.
Rebecca qui demande
Rebecca is
comment vous avez sélectionné
asking,
les personnes dans
how
les
did you
échantillons de
choose
recherche.
the
Je ne sais pas si
persons
c'est
that
seulement
were
pour
in the
l'échantillon 6 ou
research
pour l'ensemble de la
themes? I don't
démarche,
know
mais
if that
peut-être
was
que vous
only true
pourriez en
for
dire
theme
quelques
6
mots.
before, or
Donc, qui
perhaps
a
for
été
the entire
sondé puis
project. Could you
spécifiquement dans
please
le chantier 6,
explain to us
puis
who you
peut-être
surveyed for
éventuellement dans le
theme 6,
projet là, qui
and
vont
then
être les
more broadly
personnes
speaking in a project?
qui vont être interrogées là, pour les
And
différents chantiers.
what are the different people that will
Je peux
be
commencer si ça
involved in the
pour le
different themes?
chantier 6.
Geneviève, I
En
could to speak
fait,
to theme 6, if I may,
toute la
regarding this
population
theme.
est susceptible de répondre. Comme
We
notre population, c'est
made
les
this
membres
available
de
to everybody,
Retranche, qui sont
and these are
60
the
personnes.
members of
On ne fait pas
Retranche.
de
There's some
sélection
60 of us. We
pour les
don't
victimes
make
de
any
violence qui
selection. We
répondent, mais
invite
c'est vraiment
any person
présentiel,
to
sur la
answer,
base du
and
volontariat.
then we do a sampling, and that's based on, it's on a
Voilà.
volunteer basis. So that's how we choose our respondents.
Pour ce qui est je vais répondre pour le chantier 1
So
parce
I
que je
can
ne peux
speak
pas
to
répondre pour
theme 1.
l'ensemble des chantiers.
I can't speak
Tout le
to
monde a
all
sa
of of the themes because in each theme we have a different methodology. But
qui sont en situation de
regarding
violence
the
puis qui se
people living in
considéraient
violence
sortis
and
d'une
who felt
dynamique de
that they
violence, on est vraiment parti du point de
have
vue
been
des
able to
personnes
exit
concernées.
violence, we really want to
Donc, nous, on n'a
glean
pas
their
mis de
viewpoints, their
critères de
perspectives. So
sortie
we
parce
didn't
qu'on
tie
sait très
any
bien que la
exit
sortie, c'est un
criteria to that
processus et
because we
c'est
know
pas
that
une
exiting is
journée
a
je suis
process.
dedans, une autre
It
journée
isn't simply
je
saying
suis
one day I'm
sortie.
in it and one another
Donc,
day
on n'est
I've
pas dans une
exited.
approche
So this
noir-blanc,
is
mais on
not
le voit
about a
aussi avec les
white and
données
black
clients auxquelles
approach,
on a
but we
accès
see
qu'il
that in the
y a
data
beaucoup de nuances
and
de
the
gris
persons that we have access
dans
to that to a great extent it is
processus
a
de
gray zone
sortie, que les
when it
personnes
comes to
font des pas en
exiting
avant,
violence.
des pas en
And
arrière. C'est des
sometimes
choses
people
auxquelles on
make a step
s'attendait
forward, a step
aussi
backwards, and that is
et que
something that we
nos
expected as well.
partenaires s'attendaient.
And it's something that was expected by our
Pour les
partnership
lieux de
partners as well.
recrutement,
Now, for
c'est beaucoup nos
the
partenaires
sites
qui
for
nous aident. Nos
recruitment,
personnes
our
expertes de
partnerships
vécu et nos
help us.
partenaires
We have our
nous
lived experience
aident
partners,
vraiment
and our
beaucoup pour
partners
le
are the ones who
recrutement. C'est
really
sûr
help
qu'on a
us
mis
to
des annonces
recruit.
aussi,
Of course, we have also published
utiliser tous les moyens
ads.
qu'on a là, de
We
courriel,
call
des
on all
flyer,
possible
email, pratique,
means,
mais les
email and
références nous
postings
viennent
in
du fait
practical
qu'on
settings,
a un
but our
partenariat qui est
references
quand
come
même
to
assez
us due to the
nombreux,
fact that we
qui
have many
couvre
people involved
des
in the
secteurs de
partnerships,
pratique très
and we
diversifiés.
covered
Donc, comme ça,
very
on peut détecter
diversified
un
practice sectors.
échantillon. C'était
We
notre
were
objectif
able to
aussi de
find
diversifier
a
l'échantillon selon les types de violences que les personnes ont
different
vécues,
segment of the
selon
population, a
les
sampling
contextes de
that involves
vulnérabilité
persons
et
who've
ça
been in
s'avère
that
quand même
situation,
pas pire
those who are in a
jusqu'à date.
vulnerable
Là,
position. And to
la
date, things are
diversité
going quite well. It's
qu'on peut
quite a
aller
diverse
chercher
sampling that we've been
grâce à
able
nos
to
partenaires qui
identify
nous
thanks to our
réfèrent des
partnerships,
participants.
partners who
Je ne sais pas
refer
si ça répond à la
participants to us.
question
I don't know if that
des autres
answers your question.
chantiers. Le
As to
chantier
the
2, il
other
n'y a pas de
themes, we have theme
recrutement parce que
2.
c'est
There
des
is
données
no recruitment there
secondaires
because this is secondary data.
populationnelles, des échantillons
It's
secondaires populationnels
populational,
qui ont été utilisés pour faire
secondary
l'analyse.
data that we
Le
use for
chantier
the
3, ben, il
purposes
n'est
of
pas encore
analysis.
commencé, mais on
Theme
va
3
encore
has not yet started.
fonctionner avec
But again, we'll
c'est
be
le chantier 3,
working,
c'est celui sur les pratiques
and again,
d'intervention.
that's about the
On
intervention
va fonctionner
practices.
avec nos
So
partenaires
we'll
qui
be
vont
working
nous
with our
aider
partners
dans chaque
who will be
chantier.
helping
Il y a un
us. So for
comité,
each theme,
Céline vous a montré
there is a
la
committee, and
composition
Céline
comité
showed you the
du chantier
composition
6
of
sur la
theme 6,
collaboration. Tous les chantiers
composition
du
and
projet
collaboration.
sont
All of
composés
the themes
de
in the
façon à
projects
diversifier
are
les expertises
designed so that we
et
can diversify
avec un souci que ce soit
expertise.
paritaire.
Again, with concern that it remains,
manipulés
that there's a parity
dans
between
la
research and parity,
composition. Donc, quand le
that there's
chantier 3
always a
sur les
balance
pratiques va
struck.
commencer,
So
ça va
when
être les
theme
partenaires
3
du
on
projet, les
practices
chercheurs
will
impliqués dans
start,
ce
it will
chantier-là qui
be the
vont
partners and the
donner des
research
orientations
partners
sur
specifically
comment
who will give
sélectionner
direction as
nos
to
personnes. Encore là, ça va
how
être des
our people will
volontaires,
be selected. Again,
comme
these will
c'est le
be
cas pour
volunteers,
les
as
autres
is the
chantiers
case for
qualitatifs.
the other qualitative themes.
Ben,
Si je
merci
peux me
beaucoup.
permettre, je
If
voulais
I
juste
may,
ajouter quelque chose que je
I'd
trouve
just like to
intéressant.
add
C'est
something that I
effectivement
found of interest, and I think it's relevant as well.
la question de définir ce que
There's
c'est la
the
sortie
issue
de la
of
violence. Ça a
defining
été un exercice
what
collectif
exiting
quand
violence
même.
is. That was a
C'est un
collective
thème
exercise as well,
c'est comme conceptuellement qui est
because
difficile
it's a
à
theme that
circonscrire
is
là.
difficult
Je
to
sais pas si c'est on
frame
a fait
conceptually.
lors d'une rencontre annuelle
And during our
du
annual
risque
meeting,
spécifique où
we
tous les gens
held
étaient
a
appelés
workshop
à
where
échanger en
everybody
plus
was
sur ce que ça
asked
veut
to
dire
have
la sortie de
exchanges
la
as to
violence là,
what it
pour
means to exit
essayer
violence.
d'établir des
We
critères.
were trying to
Mais
establish
ça
criteria.
aussi, c'est
But
juste
again,
une volonté de mettre à
I
profit
think it's
toutes
a
les expertises
willingness
là, puis de
to put
croiser
forward
nos
all
regards sur
available
comment on pense
expertise
que
and to
le
have a
concept,
different
s'assurer
viewpoints as to how we see this concept, and
qu'on
to
élargit plutôt
explain
que rétrécir, en fait, là,
that
dans
we
sa
must
rigueur.
expand rather than limit what we're trying to do.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you
Je
so
peux juste
much.
vous dire, j'ai placé le sondage, pardon.
Well, I have put
Je vais
the
chercher à
survey
placer
there.
le sondage. N'oubliez pas de répondre
So
avant de
please
quitter
don't
le
forget
Zoom.
to answer our questionnaire
Mais je
before
voulais juste
you leave
rajouter
Zoom.
aussi
But let me add
un
this,
point là, qui m'apparaissait
just one point
important
that I
par
felt was
rapport, puis là,
important.
ça vient de me sortir de l'idée.
Again, it has just come to
Désolée.
mind.
Par rapport au fait que, bon, si j'y repense, je reviendrai.
Is
Je te
that
laisse continuer,
I have
Katia.
simply drawn a blank. I'll come back to it if it comes back.
Excuse-moi, c'était ça. Je
Yeah,
pensais que vous aviez
sorry about
fini
that. I
sur
thought that you had
le sondage qui
finished.
a été placé.
And this
Mais
was about the
aussi, il y a
questionnaire.
des nouvelles questions. Alors, je ne sais
But we
pas.
also have some new questions.
Alors, la nouvelle question, c'est allez-vous parler
So
du
the new
comité
questions, are you going
d'experts
to
de
be
vécu?
speaking
Mais souvent, en fait, les
about
nouvelles de
the
ce comité-là,
committee
par exemple,
of
les opinions
the
et
lived
les
experience
interventions.
experts, and are you going to
Et il y
speak
a les
about the
médias
interventions?
également qui vous remercient.
And so again, we have some
Oui,
persons who
je
are
peux peut-être
thanking you.
expliquer
Well, I
comment on a
could
mis en
perhaps
place ce
explain how we
comité-là.
struck this
Le
particular
choix des
committee.
personnes
So
repose encore une fois
choosing
sur
people
l'expertise
once
de notre groupe.
again was based on
Il y a
our
des
group's
personnes dans le
expertise.
groupe qui
There are
ont
people in the group
régulièrement des projets de
who
recherche
regularly work on
participative
participatory
avec ou pour
research
des personnes
projects
directement concernées,
involving
qui
persons
nous ont
who are directly
référé des
involved.
personnes qui ont
And they
participé à
referred
d'autres
us to
projets.
persons who took part in other
C'était quand
projects.
même pour nous important que
So it was
notre
important for
comité
us
d'experts de vécu
that our lived
soit
experience
rencontre au moins
experts
minimalement
committee,
les mêmes
at the very
objectifs
least, meet
ou
with the same
critères, entre guillemets, on va dire ça. Dire ce mot-là
criteria or
pour
objectives. I don't
parler
particularly
du
like the word
comité des personnes
criteria,
d'experts de
but we
vécu,
wanted to make
mais
sure
que
that
les
they
personnes
met
qui
with those
participent au projet puissent
same
livrer leur
criteria, but so
expérience,
that those people
c'est-à-dire
could
d'avoir une
share their
certaine
experiences. So
distance
first of all, that they
critique
had
par
a
rapport à
certain
son expérience,
critical
c'est très
distance
important pour
vis-a-vis
nous
their own
parce qu'on veut
experience, and
pas
that's
que
very important
la
for us
participation dans le
because
projet soit un lieu
what
de
we're trying to avoid
recrimination.
is that this be a
Quand la
place
personne est encore
that would be
dedans, dans
triggering
des
if the person
démarches,
is still inside
beaucoup
the
de démarches en
entire
parallèle
experience and that
pour
there are
s'en sortir.
parallel
C'est difficile
processes
d'avoir un recul
taking
sur
place
son
in parallel. It's
expérience
very
puis
difficult to
d'apporter
take a step
un
back from
soutien
one's
sur
experience and
qu'est-ce
then
qu'on
to
devrait faire, comment on devrait
contribute
le faire
to
dans le
what
projet.
should we do
Donc,
in the
ça, après
project.
qu'on a
So that
obtenu
was
les
one point.
références,
So
il n'y avait
once
pas
we've
d'autres
received the
critères de
references,
sélection.
there were
C'était tout
no
le
other
monde qui était
selection criteria. This was
référé,
everybody who had been
inclus, mais on ne
referred,
voulait
who
pas
was
non plus un
included.
comité trop
But nor
gros
did
de
we
personnes
want to
experts de
have
vécu.
an
D'abord, la
overly
personne qui
large committee
dirige
involving persons with lived
ce
experience, because
comité-là,
first of all,
c'est
the
Émilie
person heading
Bourdage, qui
that
est
committee
elle-même
is
une
Emily
experte de vécu
Bourdage, and she is, in
pour avoir
fact,
vécu
a
des
lived
violences
experience
conjugales et
expert. She was
sexuelles qu'elle a
subjected to
mentionné
family and
publiquement
sexual
dans
violence, and
différents
she spoke about it
médias là,
publicly in various media
ouverts au grand public.
outlets that are public.
Donc, elle est professeure à l'Université
She
du
is a
Québec à
professor
Chicoutimi, mais elle
at
a une
the
expérience de
University of
vécu.
Quebec in
Donc, elle
Chicoutimi,
s'occupe
but
du
she
comité
has a
des
living
personnes
experience. So
expertes
she's
de vécu.
responsible for
Et
the lived
on a
experience expert
choisi
committee.
d'inclure
So
tout le
we
monde qui était
decided
référé, mais
to
ça
include
restait
everybody
un
who had
assez
been
petit groupe
referred, but
pour
at
permettre
the
à
end
tout
of
le
the day, it
monde
was a
d'avoir
fairly small group
des
so that
chances
everybody
de
would have an
collaborer
opportunity
quand il y a
to
des
take
demandes,
part
comment ça fonctionne.
when
C'est
there's a
qu'il n'y a
request.
pas
And
tant
so
de
how does this
réunions
work?
souvent du
There
comité.
aren't
Il y en a
so
eu
many
au début
meetings in the
pour
committee. At the beginning, there were
savoir c'est
quite a
quoi les
few
rôles que les personnes
to
voulaient jouer.
define the roles that
C'est
people wanted to play.
bien correct que ce soit
And
différent
it's
d'une
fine
personne à l'autre.
that this vary
On a
from one person
accepté, il y
to
en a qui
another.
veulent
We
faire
accepted that
conférences
because
de
some people
ménageurs,
want
d'autres
to
qui veulent
hold
valider des outils. Il y
witness
en a d'autres qui
conferences,
veulent
others want to organize
s'impliquer dans
tools, others
l'organisation
want to be
d'activités. Et on
involved in
a
organizing
essayé de
activities,
donner
etc.
les rôles
And we've
aussi par
tried to
conséquence de ce que la personne a
assign the roles
exprimé
based
vouloir
on
faire
what
dans
the
le
person had
projet. Après,
expressed
on
wanting
va
to do in the
vraiment pour les
project.
chefs de
And after
chantier
that, we
dire, OK,
look
quels
at
les besoins de mon chantier dans
theme
la prochaine
heads and
session.
who have to
Qui
identify
pourrait
what the needs
solliciter
will be for the
l'expertise des
next
experts de
theme.
vécu.
And you
Et
might
après ça, on offre ces options-là aux
there
experts de
reach out
vécu
to
une fois
experts
par
of lived
session.
experience, and so
Puis
can
c'est
we
la
offer that
réponse.
experience to
Les
each
gens
expert?
peuvent
And so
répondre
that's the answer.
qu'est-ce qui les intéresse,
People are able to
où est-ce qu'ils
explain what
sont
it is that they're
intéressés
interested
d'être
in
impliqués.
and where they want
Une
to
des
become
personnes expertes
involved.
de vécu
So
a
one of the
développé le
lived
guide
experience
de
experts
collaboration dont
developed
on
a
parlait
collaboration
tout
guide
à l'heure, en
that Céline
collaboration avec
mentioned
d'autres
earlier.
personnes.
And this is how to
Leur
collaborate with other
implication est
persons.
vraiment
And so their
importante et
involvement truly
significative.
is important and it's significant.
On arrive au terme de notre heure de
Well, this brings
webinaire.
us to the end of our webinar.
Grand merci
So
pour
many,
votre
many thanks
participation à ce
for your
webinaire.
participation in this
Geneviève
webinar.
et Céline,
Geneviève
ça
and
a été
Céline,
très apprécié.
this has been greatly
Donc, je vous
appreciated.
remercie de bien
So
vouloir
thank you
remplir, s'il vous plaît, le
to all of our
questionnaire
participants for
que vous avez
filling out the
transmis.
questionnaire that was
Et
sent
puis,
to you.
je vous souhaite un excellent
And I
succès là,
hope
pour la suite
that
de ce magnifique projet.
you
J'espère que
that
vous pourrez nous
you will
envoyer
see a great deal of
des
success in
suites
this
là, dans
project,
quelques
and
temps
we
quand
look
vous aurez
forward
reçu
to
les données
hearing
sur les différents chantiers.
from you
Donc,
about the
merci
progress
beaucoup pour
achieved in
votre
the
temps.
various themes.
Et
So
puis,
thank you
merci
very
à
much
tous
for
et à
your
toutes là, pour votre
time. So
implication
thank you to
suivie.
all of our
Donc,
participants
bonne
today.
fin de journée à tous.
And I wish you a
Merci.
wonderful day today. Bye-bye.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you
Merci.
very much. Thank you.